All right, shalom, shalom, family. So I'm gonna be using the computer today because this study requires a lot of notes. So we're gonna start with the Lord's Prayer. So bow with me as we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, honor be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on the righteous path and guard us from the evil one. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen, amen, family. All right, so what we're going to be going over today is we're going to be going over Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 and Daniel 11. As we always like to do these things live to give brothers motivation or even just a chance to go over these things live. As sometimes when we go over things in the scripture, sometimes it's nice to do things as a fellowship and do things together. So we always give that opportunity to do these things. So today we'll be looking at Daniel 8. Let me just change this just to make it a little dimmer. All right. So we're going to start with Daniel 8. So in Daniel 8, it's kind of we're just going to start reading and we're going to get an understanding of it. And as always, I'm not the best reader, so I'm just going to let something play and we're going to be breaking down it as we go. So let's go about it.
Daniel 8. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw, that I was at Shushan, in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last.
All right, so now let's break down what we're seeing here. So the first thing we have to understand is where is Daniel? Where's Daniel at this time? So he's at a place at a providence at Elam. So Elam, I don't know why I don't have a map open. As it's always good to get these things by a map just to get a little understanding of these things. So remember, Daniel, what we just seen was that Daniel was exalted to rule over governors. So remember that Daniel is no longer just a servant in Babylon. He's would be like a ruler in Babylon. So remember, Babylon, we're not just talking about this location here, though this would be the headquarters or the main area of ancient Babylon, but Babylon's control area of control, they be controlling all these areas. Now, it's also important to note that they will be in the area of Elam. So Elam will be about in this corner right here. So that's very important just to get the idea of that. Now he's getting a visual of what's about to happen. Now this is before Persia rises up, but he's getting the idea of the next empire to come. So let's take a look at that and see what is he talking about here. What is Daniel actually seeing here? So Daniel is actually seeing a goat here, and what he's actually seeing is that this goat has 2 horns. One horn is bigger than the other. The reason why is because it has to do with the connection of history, also with the interpretation. I'm just going to jump down and give a quick interpretation of it just to show what it's talking about. Now, the thing about prophecy is that the main thing we have to understand about prophecy is that history is very important when it comes to prophecy. Also, we have to know there's no private interpretation. Fortunately for us, in Daniel 8, we also get an interpretation in this chapter. We actually get an interpretation. It actually tells us that right here, the ram which thou sawest, having 2 horns, is the king of Media and Persia. So we already got an interpretation on what this is. So the body would be the whole body of pretty much the Persian Empire. And you also would have a connection with these horns, right? Media and Persia. So that's very important. So sometimes, like, you'll see where it talks about a king named Darius of the Medes, right? That's a different Darius than Darius, the king of the Persians. Darius the Medes ruling at the same time with Cyrus, the king of the Persians. So just remember that these 2 kingdoms are not necessarily one, but they are working in a unison. Basically, to understand that is that Persia is the larger horn, is the stronger power. But Cyrus, his father was apparently Persian, and his mother was apparently Median, and the Medianites, they thought that it was linking Persia and Media together. Now, also what's interesting about that, if you know about the Medianites, about Media or Mahdi is actually in connection with the sons of Japheth. Now, this is very important because the later kingdom of the Persian kingdom it's important to note that a lot of the later kingdoms, became very diverse, very mixed. It's very important just to note that factor. But they're going to have two different powers. So Media and Persia. Now you're going to have something else that's going to happen, and we're going to talk about that. The next one that comes, we're going to also note that there's an interpretation for the next creature that's going to be there. It's going to give us an understanding for that one as well. And that's why we look at these things because there, remember, no private interpretation, but we'll go off this pace because the Daniel 8, Daniel 11 are connected. Daniel 8 and 11 are connected. Daniel 10 is kind of like a middle. It's kind of like when we went over Daniel 6 and some of those chapters 4, 5, and 6. Those were just more like little reads than rather going over detail of prophecy. This one's going to be details of prophecy, Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, but we'll go over Daniel 10 as well. We're not going to go over Daniel 9 because that's a different prophecy. We'll go over that another time. But let's note here that it's telling us while Daniel is in the time of the Babylonians, he's actually getting a prophecy about the Medes and the Persians and then what's going to happen to them and then following afterwards. Let's continue.
I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes.
So let's understand this too. Notice that it said the he goat. Another way to understand his interpretation is the direction that it's coming from. It's coming from the west, right? So it's telling us that this individual being over here is saying that westward it be come from this way, and it be coming this way, and it'll take it out. So that's very important. So it's talking about a kingdom that would be on the east, but coming westward and invading this kingdom, and then we're gonna note what happens. Let's continue.
Came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand.
Now let's understand this. So remember, it came to the river is just talking about pretty much where the Euphrates is. The Euphrates, every when you think about the Daniel statue, every single kingdom ruled the Euphrates. Every single kingdom, when I say every single kingdom, the main powers, they usually rule this area. This is like a major area that a lot of kingdoms want to have control of. They want to have control of the Euphrates and these areas because there's a lot of connections with these things. But also note, let's go over here now. Let's note the interpretation a little ahead of the next goat that comes, right? This is going to let us know that the rough goat is the king of Grecia, right? So that's very important. So Gabriel's given us the answer that Media and Persia will be taken down by Grecia. Now, what's interesting about this, if you know the history about Daniel, anyone who understands the time frame of Daniel knows that Daniel is also historically confirmed coming to pass before, well, not coming to pass, but being written before the time that all these things come to pass. We know this because there's a time when Alexander comes to invade Jerusalem. The pretty much the Judeans show him a part in the Bible, this part that says that pretty much he's going to rule. He sees that and he's so impressed that he leaves them alone. And upon him leaving them alone, it's well documented that Alexander Great himself end up expanding his kingdom over all the areas that Persia expanded his kingdom. So that's just important to note that this he goat will be also called, right? It will have a great horn, but it's also called the first king. It's the first king of the Grecian Empire. We already know who that is. That's very obvious when you know history. The first ruler of Greece, that's Alexander the Great, the first one to spread the growth of pretty much the Greek Empire. But we're going to also note what happens after him. It's going to be a lot of detail, but we're going to break it down what happens right after him when his kingdom is going to be divided. We're going to look at that, and then it's going to talk about a little horn. We'll talk about that too, because we already talked about a little horn in Daniel 7. But remember how I pointed out in Daniel 7, that's a different little horn than this little horn. But we'll get into that when we get into it. All right, let's continue.
Therefore the he goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression.
All right, so now this is where, now remember, we're going to get into the details of this in Daniel 11, goes into more details of these events. It's essentially the same prophecy, but Daniel 11 just goes into more details on these events. Now, what's important is that it's kind of taken off. It lets us know that after Alexander had went, the kingdom had divided, and then there was another king that had rised up. The king that rised up basically persecuted the people. And what it actually does is it takes away what is called a daily sacrifice. Now, what is a daily sacrifice? Now, I should have had opened up something here just to get a little understanding on this. I think it's important that I open this up. And this is why I did this on a computer, because this one actually requires more notes. We got to first understand what is it talking about when it's talking about the daily sacrifice, right? There's a couple different examples in the scriptures of the daily sacrifice. And in prophecy, there's actually 3 times the daily sacrifice is removed. And it's important to note the difference. So we're going to do that real fast so that we can understand a little bit what's going on here, because it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? It can kind of cause confusion in prophecy if we start doing a thing called prophecy merging. You don't want to do prophecy merging. Like, for example, in Daniel 9, it has a different prophecy, and Daniel 8 has another prophecy. But let me go to a note here so that I can explain it with the note. So I think it's more better if we go over this note real fast. All right. Let it load up real fast, and then we'll talk about this. And as always, we're doing this live, so if you have any questions, we'll go over those things. Let me just move this thing off the screen so I can make the screen a little more clear. All right. There we go. All right. Make sure that charger is in. All right. So let's talk about what is the daily sacrifice, because we get a lot of different scriptures where we get an understanding on what is the daily sacrifice. So in a video, I have a video where I go over that, but there's 3 what's the word I'm looking for? There's 3 places where you can actually see where it'll talk about the original daily sacrifice. It's pretty much a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the evening. In ancient times, they would do a sacrifice of a lamb in the morning and in the evening every single day. They would call that the daily sacrifice, or the tamid, how you say that, right? It's it's pretty much a sacrifice that was made to, in a way, sanctify the people, and get them ready for the day and everything. Is pretty much what it is a sacrifice, a continual sacrifice or a daily sacrifice. It's something that would happen all the time. But let me go down real fast and point something out real fast. There's three different sacrifices that's recorded in the Bible in three different chapters. In Daniel chapter 9, it'll talk about it'll talk about a sacrifice. It wouldn't call it a daily sacrifice, but it would call it the sacrifice. That one is a different thing. That one's actually called the 70 weeks prophecy. That one's actually talking about word for word the Messiah. The sacrifice is the Messiah in that one in Daniel 9. But in the one we're looking at today, which is also called the 2300 day prophecy, the daily sacrifice there is the classic sacrifice. That's actually talking about the day-to-day sacrifice. We'll talk about what happened. As you can see in this image, it kind of gives you an understanding of what happened at that time. What is it talking about here? Pretty much there is a person who we're going to go into detail of, that he himself actually makes a sacrifice in one of the holy altars and pretty much takes away the daily sacrifice. These are also important to understand, because the daily sacrifice being taken away is also followed with a abomination of desolation. Now, it's important to understand what I mean by abomination of desolation. Abomination means something that causes offense. Desolation means it basically causes it to be basically abandoned. Basically, it's something that causes so much offense that it causes the area to be abandoned. So just remember that when we're saying that it's going to be an abomination of desolation, and also the removing of a daily sacrifice. So there's a different one in Daniel 9, a different one in Daniel 8 and 11, and a different one in Daniel 12. So those are different prophecies with different daily sacrifices. But we're going to get into them very deep today when we get into it. So let's understand that why was the daily sacrifice taken away? It gives us the reason, and we can also note this in history, what happened. The reason was because of transgression. Now, if you look in history and you see a little bit of what's going on, there's a couple of different sources that talk about what happened. Pretty much the Jews were taking part. They were kind of forsaking the order, and they were basically doing things like the nation around them, and they were forsaking the covenant. Pretty much, like they were taking away because remember, this is ancient time. They were doing the circumcisions, and they would do a thing called basically reversing circumcision. I can't tell you how they did it, but supposedly they were reversing their circumcision. I don't know how to explain it more than that, but that's what it's talking about. It was talking about basically, and the transgressions of desolation. It's important to understand that it's talking about that because of the people's wickedness, this thing basically came to pass. And it gets really crazy when you look at the details of what happened. It actually leads up to what is called in history the Maccabean Revolt. It's a major revolt that's known. It's not just in the book of Maccabees, though the book of Maccabees does record it as accurate as the history does. But we'll get into it as we go. Let's look a little more into it. So what's important is, at this point, we have to understand that it's gonna, let me go up a little bit. It's important to understand that it's letting us know that we have to understand that therefore the he-goat waxed very great, right? That's talking about the Grecian Empire, right? And says when he was strong, the horn was broken, right? And then we notice that four came up, and it tells us from the four winds of heaven. What's it talking about there when it's talking about these four horns that came up before this little one comes up? It says four horns rise up, but what's important is the way that it's saying they rose up. It tells us that the little horn, or the larger horn, was it pretty much broken off, right? And then other horns came up, but in their own power, right? They weren't part of the one horn, though they were part of the body, right? Note that in the prophecy here, the horns represent kings, but the body represents the kingdom. The whole kingdom is going to be the whole body, but the horns represent the pieces, right? Because remember, this horn right here is the one that took down the goat before with the two horns right here. So this goat came and it took down this goat. This is the one with the short horn and the long horn, which is Media and Persia, right? Media is the smaller one, and Persia is the larger one. And then the one horned goat basically took down the whole body of it, because it, remember, it talks about it stumped his body, right? It took down his whole body, right? Not just broke his horns off, but it took down his whole body. That means that it took down it's the kingdom of Persia. It took down the whole kingdom of Persia. And then what happened is we would get a split of kingdoms, but from the Grecian Empire. I'm just going to go down and show you basically a summary of what basically those kingdoms are. So remember, very important, when Alexander the Great came, he took all these lands. So he came from this area of Greece and he came down, he took all these areas, Alexander the Great. And then remember, the Persian Empire was all this. Now we're going to talk about how Persia also provoked the Greeks during a time frame, which is talked about in Daniel 11. One of the kings of Persia, one of the fourth king after Cyrus, basically provoked the Greeks and basically, defeated them in a way. But then later on, we'll see that Alexander the Great during his time comes in by himself and he takes all these areas. He takes all these areas. So he ends up taking all these areas. And then in his time, he ended up dying, and he dies at Babylon. So that's just also interesting in itself. He dies at the location of Babylon. So upon his death, we're going to see his kingdom actually divided. I'm going to talk about these four kingdoms real fast that actually come from him. Well, after him, they're actually four of his generals. They end up getting in power. The four kingdoms will be the Casandar kingdom, which is here. You'll see it over here where you see Greece and everything. And you see the Lysimachus kingdom, which you'll see where you see modern day Turkey, or ancient what is called Anatolia. And then you'll see the Seleucus kingdom. What's important is you're going to see a mention of a king of the north and the king of the south in this prophecy. We're going to note that the Seleucus kingdom is actually going to take this one and is going to take this one. This is going to be the king of the south. He's going to also go against what is called the king of the, this is the king of the north. I'm sorry about that. This is the king of the north. The Seleucus kingdom is the king of the north. The king of the south is the what is called the Ptolemaic kingdom, or better yet, the Egypt, where you'll see Egypt at. You'll also know that that's the area where Alexander had took as well. All these areas are areas that Alexander had took, but notice that it's going to be split into four major powers. Notice the middle area. In the middle area, you'll also note that Jerusalem is almost like a divided area. It's like, not that it's divided, but it's in between these great powers, right? Though it's in the midst of these kingdoms. Usually in all these kingdoms that come, right? In the sequence of the kingdoms that were described in Daniel's vision. Remember, we also got to note that Daniel also was told about, let me actually open up another note of Daniel 7. This one, just for the sake of explaining that Daniel already had a vision of all these kingdoms coming in pretty much one after another. So one kingdom would reign, then another kingdom would come, and then another kingdom would come. And we talked about this in Daniel 7. I'm going to open this up real fast. So in Daniel 7, also in Daniel 2 is where it goes over these kingdoms. You'll see that the head of gold would be Babylon, right? It will also talk about, remember we talked about the beast, the lion with the wings and everything. The next power would be Media and Persia, which would be the silver. That's the bear that has the three ribs in his mouth. Now, remember, in this prophecy, it tells us that the Greek Empire comes next. And then right after that kingdom comes the Greek Empire, which is bronze, right? And notice that the imagery still is complementary, right? The heads, there's four heads on one body. Four heads mean four whole empires. And then you're also going to note that it has four wings. The wings represent the directions in four directions. We also get that in Daniel. Remember, it told us that they also are settled in four directions, right? Right here, one towards the four winds, right? Four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. So you see what's going on there? And then came a little horn, right? Where's the little horn? Where is it positioned at? Is very important to note. We're going to also get the clarity in Daniel 11 to let us know exactly where he is. He's going to be in the king of the north. That's going to be basically where you see, going back over here, where you have your Seleucus kingdom. So that's going to be the kingdom of the north, and then the kingdom of the south. You're going to note here. That's important for when we go over that information. So going up, I'm gonna go back up here. So again, the understanding. So remember, the Grecian Empire is the body, right? And then this whole empire, I always say this word wrong, but academic empire, pretty much the empire of Persia that rose up is a later empire of Persia. Because if you know, the Persians, when you think like, for example, you also got to note roots of individuals, right? Persia, the Persians. You think of like, Ashur and different individuals, the Shemites and things like that. The Persians are also in connection with Elam and things like that. That's important to note. But the later Persians are more of a mingled group. So that's just very important to note that this group is actually going to be taken down by the Grecian Empire that comes in. So just keep that in mind that this whole power is replaced by this power, and it's all in unison. Everything that you see is in unison. There's nothing that's a private interpretation or anything that just seems like how do you match this up? A lot of it already have its interpretation. So that's very good that we already have an interpretation. So note that a little horn comes up. So here we're going to get more of this is more like a summary in Daniel 8, but it's very detailed when we start getting the uh, details from Gabriel. He's going to give the interpretation. But let's continue on.
And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And it came to pass, when I, even I Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then, behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man.
All right, so let's understand what's going on here at this point. So, what's important, this is why it's called the 2,300 day prophecy. Sometimes you'll see this prophecy mixed up. I just want to show you this real fast. If you had seen this before, you want to be careful because there are some churches like 7-day Adventists that have made the mistake of merging this together. It happened in 1844. It was called the Great Disappointment. If you never heard of it, it was pretty much a claim that Messiah was supposed to return in 1843, but he didn't return in 1843. So in 1844, they end up changing the prophecy to mean something that it doesn't make sense when you put it hand to hand with prophecy. It doesn't make no sense at all. Just to understand, the reason why I'm showing you that is because if you ever seen something like this, it's going to show you this. If you ever seen a chart that has the 70 weeks prophecy, you'll notice this first part right here. From here to here, this is the 70 weeks prophecy. Right here is the 70 weeks prophecy. As it says, 70 weeks of Daniel in Daniel 9. This is actually correct. This is 100% correct. Right here to here, this is correct. But the problem is when they combine to try to make it extend and try to bring it to 1844 is the 2,300 day prophecy. What's interesting is in the book of Daniel, we actually get the interpretation for this 2,300 days. Are they years? Because sometimes in prophecy, they do become years. Sometimes in prophecy, days become years. That's true. Sometimes in prophecy, unless it's clarified, unless the interpretation is given. Which in this prophecy, the interpretation is given that they're actually days. We know that Gabriel actually would tell us in the interpretation, he'll tell us that the days would be sure. But the word sure there is actually a Hebrew word that actually means emeth or emen, like true. The word he'll say is sure or true, meaning basically it is what it is. Like basically coming from amen is what he's saying. It's basically saying those days are days, is what he's concluding. It's basically saying those days are not to be changed. Those days are actually going to be days. And it fits exactly perfectly with the time frame of the prophecy. We'll go over that as we go over it as well. Let's go back over here and let's continue. Let me just change that to that. All right.
And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision.
So usually everyone knows who's Gabriel. If you have any questions, let me know. But who's Gabriel? Gabriel's an angel, right? He's mentioned in other places, right? He's going to be mentioned in also in the New Testament. So Gabriel is an important character, right? He's the one that came up and said, Mary, blessed are you, right, among women. Gabriel's a messenger, right? But let's continue.
So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I was afraid, and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me, and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be.
Now let's understand what he's saying here. Is he saying that this is actually going to be in the end times, or what is he talking about? He's actually note what he's saying here. He says in the last end of the indignation. Now, why is it in the time of his indignation? Now, Flavius Josephus actually writes on a lot of these events in details. There's a part where he writes that supposedly Samaria was calling Antiochus God. So some individuals would call Antiochus God. Now remember, Samaria, a lot of the Sumerians, historically and in other sources, we know that the Sumerians also were settled in the areas of Egypt. Most of the Jews were actually in the areas of Egypt, in the area where you will have basically the king of the south. So that's very important. But for some reason, they were calling him God. And other people were calling him God, and a lot of people were taking part with the basically the Greek practices and were forsaking the covenant. So this is why this had happened, that people were forsaking the way of the Most High at that time. And remember, this is all happening in the midst of the 70 weeks prophecy. That's very important. And you'll note that because he'll talk about that the little horn came against Messiah the Prince. That's important to note that basically him coming against the prince is saying that he's basically standing in the way of the prophecy because he threatens to destroy the temple, which remember the 70 weeks prophecy declares that the temple has to be there. It tells you that in 70 weeks, right, this thing will be set up for the people and for the holy city. So he's standing against the prophecy is what he would be standing from. And we'll note that when he says the prince of princes and things like that, he'll stand against the prince of princes, which most people would know that as the Messiah. That we stand against the Messiah himself. It was very important. But note that it's talking about at the time of the indignation, right? For at the time appointed, the end shall be. So it's letting us know of the end of that time frame. Just note that. Let's continue.
The ram, which thou sawest having two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power.
See how it gives us the interpretation there? It tells us that not the body, right? Not the body being destroyed, but the horn being destroyed. So remember, the whole body is Grecia, and the horn is the king. So four other kings are going to rise up, but not in his power, not in the power of the first king. Basically, it's saying that they're going to be divided, is what it's saying here, which we see all these things come to pass as exactly as it's said here.
And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up.
Notice what it's saying there. What time, whose kingdom? It's talking about the time of Grecia. At the end of the time of Grecia, that's when you're going to get the final ruler, final ruler who's a main ruler, a powerful ruler, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. He himself would come to power. And notice that it says, when the transgressors are come to a full. Why? Because the things that were happening at that time, when you look up a little bit what's going on, the people were rebelling and doing all types of things that were fairly wicked. So it's very important to understand that it was a time that the people went into great rebellion. If you want me to go over the history of that time, like the direct settings and set the setting, I'll go into that another time and go into what was happening. There's a couple different sources that goes over how some of the Israelites in that time were becoming one with the nations, and they were calling this individual God. So it got very bad. So this is one of those things that it really came to a point where it literally is almost what's the word I'm looking for? It mirrors what is seen in Revelation as the beast. It mirrors it, completely mirrors it. But remember, this is going to be during the time of the old covenant. So very, very important to remember that while we're going over these things. But let's continue.
And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand.
So what does it mean broken without hand? Let's understand that term. What does it mean broken without hand? Think about the ten commandments. How did Moses get the 10 commandments the first time? God cut it out of a rock and no man cut it out. That's what it means by without hands. It means no man cut it out. No man had basically did this thing, but God Himself had did the thing. So God cut out the 10 commandments from a rock, and He wrote the commandments on the rock. But what happened? Moses got the commandments, and he seen what the people were doing, and what happened? As soon as they got the commandments, he literally broke the commandments, like actually broke the commandments, right? Like he actually took the tablets and threw them down, and they broke. The people were worshiping an idol. They were worshiping a golden statue of a bull. So we have to understand when it's saying broken without hands, is in the sense of that understanding. So a lot of times in prophecy is feeding off of the what's the word I'm looking for? It's feeding off of the previous teachings or precepts or lessons or lines upon lines that were spoken in the biblical narrative. It's assuming that you already had about what that meaning means, and is assuming that pretty much you understand that when it's talking about the prince of princes, and it's talking about broken without hands, it's connecting very spiritual things and high things. So remember also that it's talking about this individual, as it says right here, and by peace shall destroy many. Now, how is it that by peace he's destroying many? Because let's go over here real fast and let's understand a little bit what's happening here. So Antiochus Epiphanes historically had did something well known. Let me just show you a little bit of what's going on here just to get a little understanding. I'm just going to open up something here, and I'm going to show you basically what I mean here, what happened. So it's well known in history what had happened. It's recorded on multiple sources that's very detailed and whatnot. Basically, what happened, this thing has too much ads. I'm just going to close. I'm just going to read you the highlight and whatnot. Right here. Just going to open this up. Antiochus Epiphanes set up a idol in the temple. You can also call it the god of forces, Zeus, right? He set Zeus in the temple. You can see right here. I'm going to read it. Destruction of Seleucus Empire. And remember, this is at the end of the Greek Empire. So very important. So Antiochus was it says a zealous Hellenist. That just basically means, Greek culture and everything like that. And is remembered for his encouragement, right? Watch what it says here. Remember, he destroyed them by peace. His encouragement of Greek culture, right? And instruction or institutions throughout his empire, right? Institutions. He also had, like, for example, gymnasiums. Understand, like we said today, we're getting on prophecy. Sometimes history is ugly. So mind that is you might have some controversial topics that we're going to talk about, but understand when I say these things, I'm saying it with a sense of we're going to go about it without obviously without cussing, keeping it PG and everything. But during the Olympics, their little Coliseum style things, even like what you call like even today they still kind of do the same practices, but they don't do it the way they did before. They would actually do naked Olympics. So understanding that, that's why the people would uncircumcise themselves, because they wanted to do the naked Olympics so that when people see them, they will also know that they're part of the Hellenistic style, that they also are forsaking the laws when they see it. So that's also important to understand. Ultimately, Antiochus Hellenizing policies brought him into conflict with the Jewish subjects, right? That's what we know when we think about the Maccabean revolt. The final straw for the Jews was basically, when he put Zeus in the temple of Jerusalem. He put Zeus in there, and he also sacrificed a pig on the altar. He sacrificed a pig on the altar, and he made others do that as well. And if they did that, they would find peace with him and his kingdom and the style of his kingdom. But if you know about the Maccabean revolt, what is the Maccabees? What the book of Maccabees is just talking about the last name, Judas Maccabeus, right? It's just talking about Judas Maccabeus. Basically, he had basically a guerrilla war against the Seleucus kingdom, and actually pretty much held his ground for a long time. But this is actually what happened right there. And order, it says, and the order that sacrifices were to be offered to an idol of the king. So it's very important. So he did all types of things like that. If they did that, if they did what the king asked, then they would be basically in peace. So that's why it tells you, when it's talking about those things, it's talking about basically, right? All the things he did, he prospered and practiced, and he destroyed many and the holy ones, right? And what did it say? It said, and by peace shall destroy many. Now, how are they destroyed? Because they would lose their salvation, right? Think about the beast, right? What destroys you with the beast? Now, the beast can kill you, but does he actually destroy you by killing you? No. As the scripture says, don't worry about those who can hurt the body, but has no other power after that, but worry about him who has judgment over the soul and body. But what he wants to do is to get you and your whole soul to turn away from the Most High and from salvation. That's what he wants you to do, so that he can actually destroy you within. So that's very important. So that's why when you think of the mark of the beast and it says it take away your salvation, also note that the mark of the beast is not just a this is why when people try to say it's the jab or things like that, like the vaccine or things like that, no, the understanding behind a mark is actually a sign of servitude. Is very easily broken down when you break down what is a mark in the biblical narrative. There's a lot of places where it talks about it. Deuteronomy, Exodus, all types of chapters, they'll talk about it will be as a sign on your forehead, on your hand when you serve the Most High. But if you serve anything else, it's as a sign on your forehead, on your hand, that you're serving a idol. So this is an example of that. So by peace, he would destroy many, right? And then he would stand against the prince of princes. Why? Because, like I said, he put the idol in the temple. Remember that temple was needed to be there so Messiah can come there. Remember that. Remember, it also said in Daniel 9 and 24 that they had to anoint the most holy. So you need the Jews and you need the temple and you need priests to anoint the most holy. So that's very important. So it wasn't stand against the Messiah while he was in flesh, but he was standing against the Messiah in prophecy. So that's very important. So note that this individual, the Antiochus Epiphanes, just to get a little more understanding on how his mind frame was, right? Remember, he has sacrificed a pig on the altar. So that's important to note that Antiochus the fourth, he sacrificed a pig on the altar. He also made a coin of himself at a time. He made himself Zeus. That's important. He had a image and declared, basically he actually declared himself. I'm gonna read you what it says on this coin of Antiochus. So you can see right here, this writing. This is actually what it would read. So I'm just gonna read it. The arrows on the left hand side of the left coin points to the phrase theos. Now, what's the word theos? If you know the in Greek, theos means God, right? It's basically saying theos is basically calling itself God, right? Basically declaring to be the God manifest, because he's calling himself basically a God is what he calls himself. Now, in understanding, when he's saying Epiphanes, he's basically saying God manifests to manifest. But the Jews had a play on the words, and they called him basically a play on the words, and called him basically in English translated as madman. So they called him basically, Antiochus madman, right? So that was something that was going on at that time, just to get a little understanding. But these are real coins that he actually printed, and he himself basically made him, because right here, this is actually would be considered Zeus, and he basically made himself Zeus in a way to understand what he basically did. Um, these have major consequences, because these major consequences also show us the understanding that if we have a individual that is, one, putting a idol in the temple and then claiming that he is that idol, he himself is actually going to cause a lot of offense for those that take part in it. So it's very important. So get a little understanding of these things. He is the little horn. He would now let me go down and express this real fast. This is very important. There's different, like we said before, there's different little horns. There's a little horn that is talked about in Daniel 7 that has connections with Revelation. Um, that's going to be a little different. But in Daniel 8, we have another little horn. Another way we know is by the way it breaks off. The way it's detailed, right? This one will be 10 horns, then all of a sudden another horn comes up, 11th one, and it plucks up 3 by the roots, right? This one talks about 4 horns, and then it talks about on one of those horns, another horn grows up out of one of those horns. So it's very important. That's basically talking about out of the, remember, these horns are talking about kingdoms. Now, what's important to note here, these empires are also named, right, off of the names of the rulers that ruled in that time. So remember, when Alexander the Great was there, right, about 356 to 323, he was there during that time. And then what happened? The kingdom had split, and then we'll have different powers that come into effect. So you can see right here, just to get a little understanding, these kingdoms are named off of the first kings, or the first quote unquote rulers on that rose up. So you have your Lysimachus kingdom, right? The kingdom of Lysimachus that will rise up. You will have that in connection, like we said, Turkey and things like that. And then you'll have your Seleucus kingdom, right? The individual Seleucus. His kingdom was called the Seleucus kingdom, or Seleucus Empire, right? And he had a portion of area, right? You think Iraq and Syria, things like that. And then we had Ptolemy, right? Ptolemy, he had the areas of Egypt, right? He would have connections of the areas of Egypt. Um, Also, remember, these are individuals. Sometimes you'll have connections of dynasties, right? The Ptolemaic dynasty, right? These are individuals. That's why it's also important to note that the horns are the kingdoms, though they're named off of the peoples. So just to get a little understanding of those 4 ones. But from the Seleucus kingdom, that's where you're going to get Antiochus. Antiochus is going to come from the Seleucus kingdom. So Antiochus the fourth, he'll be of the Seleucus kingdom. So that's very important. He's going to be the one that's going to be the one that calls himself God. He makes himself an idol. He tells the people to take in all the practices that he wants them to be in, and then people do it. And there's Israelites that actually call him God, and that's why it says to the fullness of the transgression comes to pass, and then it comes to its end, pretty much. But this is, like I said, chapter 8 is a summary. It's also important to note that when we get to chapter 11, it goes over a little more details into these things. We'll go into some details, which you can see right here. Just to get a little understanding, I'm going to read something from Daniel 11 a little ahead of time. It just talks about, and the king, it just talks about basically the king that rises up. Watch what it says about him. And the king shall do according to his will, his will, right? And he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things, right? Against the God of gods, which he is saying that he's going to speak against the Most High, right? And shall prosper till the indignation. Remember, we talked about that. To the indignation be accomplished, right? He shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished. Now, what does it mean? The indignation be accomplished. It's the day of the Lord. The Most High is angry. That's very important. He's angry with what the people did. That's very important. Because remember, the prophecy was also to bring the people. Remember, the Daniel 9 prophecy was a promise of a future Messiah, right? A messianic figure that would come at a certain time frame, pinpoint to that time frame. And that messianic figure would be their salvation, to lead them to salvation. That's very important. A lot of people forget that, and some people don't even know that. And then they forget who Messiah is. The difference of Messiah is that he was already prophesied of in multiple places throughout the scriptures. This individual Messiah was to come for the people, but the people early forsook the way. So that's very important. So that's why it lets us know that he basically, again, continuing on, for that is determined shall be done. He says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. It's basically saying, like I said, right, the idols that he had, even the idol that he had, he's not, when he put Zeus there, he's not setting Zeus there like Zeus is different. He's actually he's actually trying to bring people to himself, saying that he's that, and he's basically saying that, worship him, that he is the God, right? That's basically what he's saying. So he's not, honoring what their fathers worship, pretty much. Nor desire women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all, right? But in his estate, right, it just lets him know he shall, right? You see what he's saying right here? But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. So the God of forces, just talking about Zeus and whatnot, supposed to be their said head god of that whole system of the Hellenization and whatnot. And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold, silver, and precious stones, and pleasant things. So you see what's going on there? So just giving a little understanding on those things. And you can see in another place right here. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many. Right? You see what he's saying there? He shall cause them to rule over many and shall divide the land for gain. So you see what's going on there? So remember how we went over this? Very important. You can see here's a more direct understanding on what's going on here. You can see right here corn, and then you see on one side, see Apollo right there. See what's going on there? So he's gonna have different idols in connection with himself, but still writing down that he himself, he'll say of Antiochus, like he'll write basically of Antiochus, God manifest, bearer of victory. He'll basically exalt himself, is what he's doing there. So that's just important to note that that's what he's doing. So everything in scripture, he's fulfilling every single thing in scripture, so much more than what's the word I'm looking for, not every last thing that he does is written down in the scripture, but we know that he himself does all these things. Here's some highlights of what he does. He ordered to destroy the scriptures, right? He basically, disallowed the Sabbath, right? He disallowed circumcision, right? He made it illegal to be circumcised. And he, like we said, he sacrificed swine in the temple, among other things. Among other things. So very important. Just to get another interesting insight, we can also see what Flavius Josephus actually writes about this time frame. He says something really interesting, and I want to read a little bit of his writings, what he says about the book of Daniel. He says something very interesting in his writings. He says this, and indeed, because he's talking about right here, he's actually talking about, he goes into it very detailedly. He goes into the time of Antiochus and everything and whatnot. He goes into the prophecy of the ram and different things like that. He goes over this same prophecy that we're going over. He talks about the same thing, right? Wax great, talk about the ram and everything. He talks about the exact same thing. And what he concludes is this. He says this, and indeed, it so came to pass that our nation, right? Because Antiochus, not Antiochus, but Flavius Josephus, which before Joseph ben Mattanyahu, he's actually a Levite. He was actually part of the temple. He would be an individual, actually a high Levite, an individual that actually is recorded that he actually went to Rome and pled for a Levite that got captured and sent to prison, and he pled for his life and got him out of prison. He's an individual that would be obviously an Israelite, a Jew in the land of Jerusalem. But he concludes, and indeed, it so came to pass that our nation suffered these things under Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Daniel's vision. Right? He's letting you know that everything that Daniel said, they witnessed it. They witnessed it. He also later goes on and talks about the 70 weeks prophecy, and talks about, where it talks about in the 70 weeks prophecy, desolations are determined. That's a different topic we'll talk about another time. That has to do with Messiah and things like that. He doesn't recognize Messiah as the Messiah. He doesn't recognize the Messiah as Messiah, but he does make a reference that the Messiah came. He had come, because the prophecy was talking about that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and that the only way Jerusalem can be destroyed was if the Messiah came, based upon prophecy. Jerusalem wouldn't fall, as we seen during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Though he had did all that he did, which was horrendous, Jerusalem didn't fall. God gave strength to his people. They fought the Maccabean revolt. This is why during the time of 70 AD, they thought they was going to have the same results. But that was the time of the Messiah was there. They were supposed to anoint him previously, but they killed the Messiah, 31 AD. We'll talk about that when the time comes. First thing we have to understand, that this Antiochus Epiphanes is known that he himself is the fulfillment to this prophecy. He word for word fulfills this prophecy to a exact T, even with the whole concentration of the understanding of his kingdom, even calculating time frame, right? How long did it say this event would happen? Is well known. Even if you was to take, for example, in the Maccabees, let me just go down real fast. In the book of Maccabees, not a lot of people like it because they say it's the Apocrypha, but considering the book of Maccabees, also with the historical events of the Maccabean revolt, which is a historical events. These are well-known historical events, right? The Maccabees was a priestly Jewish family, right? So you'll hear, like when you say the book of Maccabees, you're talking about a book of the priestly family. So they're writing about what happened at the time. I'll go into the time frame on those books just to get a little understanding. But the historical events of the Maccabean revolt, like we said, there was a rebellion, right, that had happened at that time, and a lot of things had happened. It's with Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And pretty much he defiled the temple, right? He defiled the temple, and he slaughtered a lot of Jews and a lot of people. That's why the Maccabean revolt rised up. You get other individuals who rise up. It'll talk about this individual called John and Simeon and Eleazar and different individuals that will rise up and fight against the events that happened with the Maccabean revolt. Long story short is that when we note that everything that happens is historically known, that almost anyone that looks into this piece of history, they know that Daniel's writings matches exactly what happens in that time. And when I say exactly, it goes basically, and it even tells you in the book of Daniel that Antiochus Epiphanes dies. You know how Antiochus Epiphanes dies? Remember, it says that he's destroyed without hands. No one defeats him. He is destroyed without hands. It actually is said that supposedly he got a sickness and he died from his sickness. Um, some people just say it was just a natural cause, but prophecy talks about that he wasn't destroyed by war, but he was destroyed by the Most High because of his wickedness, right? Very important. But notice going over these things, this is historical documents. What I'm showing you here is this is just a little piece of the understanding, right? Just getting a little understanding, right? Israel is prophets proclaimed was a chosen instrument of obviously God, right? Talk about his name and everything. And it's talk about that basically Antiochus Epiphanes, long story short, when you talk about what he did, right? He made it illegal to practice Judaism, right? Or the sense of the way, the original law of Moses, right? All sacrifices were to come to an end, right? He forbade the reading of the law of Moses and gave orders to search out and burn any copy. So that's very sad. You know, that a lot of copies were lost. And remember, this is Jerusalem. This is the center piece. So everything will be here. You know, everything, all the precious things, all the precious things will be there at that time. So that's very important to note that this is what they were going through. So always think of that when you think of the time of Messiah, when he came there, the Messiah that was prophesied of. When he came there to bring the people peace, to bring them together, to be the one that's supposed to be anointed, right? But notice that the individual Antiochus, he is the one that basically, you know, wanted the people to do those crazy practices. Remember, I was talking about that. What's the word I'm looking for? The as you see right here, you can see right here, in place of these practices, right? In place of all these practices, like taking away circumcision and all those things and whatnot, in place of these practices, Antiochus encouraged the development of culture clubs called gymnasiums, or in the sense of understanding, you know how you got, you know, coliseums and things like that in different areas. And in these gymnasiums, I already told you, I'm not going to go over it now. I'm not going to click it because I don't know what I'm seeing, but that's what they were doing. They were naked. They were naked, and that's why they would know if someone was circumcised. For example, a circumcised Jew taking part in the games in a gymnasium could not therefore hide where his loyalty lay. Think about that. Why couldn't a Jew hide where his loyalty lay? Because in the law of Moses, as given to Abraham, they had to circumcise themselves. But there was a way in that time that people were doing a thing like uncircumcision. I can't even express it, but that's what they were doing. Some were uncircumcising themselves, and some weren't even circumcising themselves. But if someone was to circumcise their kids, it's described that they were going through it. They were going through it. This is That's even saying it lightly to get an understanding. It's also important, you know, the name Jesus. It's also important to note that Jesus translation, remember how we broke that down. If you haven't seen that, we broke down how the name Jesus is actually linguistics. It actually translates to, if you was to go backwards into its translation, remember the J was just 400 years old. It was actually a different letter, but it will more relate to the word Joshua or Jason, right? You'll think of that. You'll see right here, we'll talk about a priest named Jason at that time, in Hebrew, Joshua, and it'll talk about what he went through at that time and different things like that. That's just some extra information, just a little understanding that these names aren't new names, but it's important to note linguistics on how names are translated from one language to another. There's understanding on those things. Names had changed. They got in shorter at that time, right? You can think Judah or Judas, right? Judas, right? That's still the same name, just to get a little understanding. But it was a crazy event that ended in pretty much the death of not Alexander, Antiochus Epiphanes. Right here, when Antiochus Epiphanes died, you just talks about another power came up and everything, and we can note the way he died and everything, exact way his death and everything. So we know that what happened was even the exact sayings, right? This is where actually you get the feast of what is Hanukkah, right? Or the feast of dedication. Now, that's not the first time you ever seen a feast of dedication. We also seen a dedication during the time of Solomon when he first built the temple. When he first built the temple, he did a dedication. So he had a Hanukkah, or what you would say, like a feast of dedication. He had a dedication to the temple. So just that's what they did at that time. They did another dedication when they restored the temple. So that's why sometimes you'll see that practice going on. So Very important to understand that that event was a major event that, you know, it's it's very heavy. It's contested in history. Everyone knows it was something that came to pass. But let's for the sake look in the book of Maccabees and get a little understanding on time frame. I'm not going to go over this in detail. I'll show you real fast when we go to Daniel 11. I have a playlist. I'll put that in the description, probably at the bottom of the direct playlist of the 2,300 day prophecy that goes into these things a little more in depth if you want to see it a little more in depth. But here's in the book of Maccabees. What I did was I broke down the whole book of Maccabees on the time frames. Now, what's important is the book of Maccabees does not use Gregorian time nor Julian time because the book of Maccabees was written during the time of the Greeks. It used Greek time frame. So that's important to note. It's using the Greek calendar. So that is very difficult to make it different. So Greek years translated to what we have now is our years is a little different, but the time frames agree. The time frames agree. The timeline is in agreement. For example, if you see like it'll say like the year 146 is actually talking about the year 167. The way we know it, there's multiple individuals that studied on it. It's not a hard calendar to study, but here's an example. Here's a book right here that goes over it. Just talks right here. Talks about the reign, the year of 137 and everything. And it'll talk about, what happened and everything. But let me go down to one that goes over these things more. So you see, it just talks about the book of Maccabees and everything. Just talks about the precise dates and everything of the Seleucus kingdom, and it'll tell you a little bit about what is using the calendars and different things like that. I'm not going to go into detail onto how the calendar works and everything, but it does go over these things into detail and how is converted, just to get a little idea. 137 of the Greek era, just to get a little understanding that you can convert those to what is time would be, as is shown by the dates given on coins. Antiochus the fourth, right, ascended the throne after October 176. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because the time frame that Antiochus Epiphanes does this, you can actually see that talked about in the Maccabees and in coins and different things like that to get the exact time frame. Maccabees, timely wise, is correct. Maccabees has a perfect time frame that actually layers these things in a basically a perfect uniform sense of understanding. Just to get a little understanding, 170, 160, just to get a little understanding on one part where it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes comes up. They'll talk about that's the year 143 of the Greek year and everything. And they'll talk about basically he comes up and he, does what he does. And then the ending of him, remember, he dies in 164. So at the time of his death, which is also recorded in Maccabees, it'll talk about this little horn, right? Or in the sense of Maccabees 2, chapter 9, or First Maccabees 6 and 16, it'll talk about Antiochus Epiphanes. What's important is also important to know if you ever read the Maccabees, there's a part where he's supposedly announced dead, but he's not dead. It's like a rumor. It said that he died, but he didn't die. Then he comes back with more fierce. He comes back with a surprise attack. He reveals himself in Second Maccabees that Antiochus Epiphanes faked his death to do a surprise attack on the Judeans, and he pretty much does a lot of slaughtering when he pops up out of nowhere. Is in 164. That's when he finally comes to his end. Just to get a little understanding on that. Now let's just do some calculations. If you take all these things in consideration and you pinpoint, if you want to make this exactly word for word pinpoint to see if this exactly fits timely wise with it, right? Remember, what's important too is that it tells you the exact months, which even using what I used was a calendar converter, which converts Hebrew years and Gregorian years. So understanding the Greek years, converting that to Gregorian, and then understand the Hebrew years because it'll tell you what time it was, right? When it's talk about Chislev and stuff like that, that's gonna be right here. You can see in our time it'll be like December, right? And right here. Talk about the end of the time. Just to get a little understanding, it went from here all the way to its ending point. So you can see right here the Feast of Dedication at that year, at that time, 164 BC. You can see right here, just telling you from 13 to this time. That's just months. We don't need the month, but we need the year. So note at the 164 was the end of that time frame, but the time that Antiochus has started was 170. Now, if we use a what I'm using here is a calculator that calculates 80 BC just to get a more pinpoint understanding of it all. The starting point, just to make it clear, you can see here about August, 170 BC to 164 BC is exactly, as you see, 2,300 days. So pinpoint, we're talking, this prophecy is so pinpoint. It's not one extra day, it's not one less day. It's exactly 2,300 days. Exactly. This prophecy is so pinpoint that there's individuals that see this prophecy and they'll say that Daniel must have been written after these events. But we know it wasn't. We know Daniel was written before these events, because you can look it up very easy. If you ever have, sometimes people say, like, especially like the New Testament, the Old Testament, they'll say the Old Testament's late or things like that. But you can look it up. You just type down and just type down Alexander Great sees the book of Daniel, and you'll find out some very deep stuff that talks about how Alexander the Great basically was told that he was in the book. So it's very important. But this prophecy is pinpoint accurate. Pinpoint accurate. So remember what it says here: until 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Because that's what happened. At the Feast of Dedication of the Maccabees, or even the Jews themselves, cleansed the temple. Let me correct this little one right here. They end up cleansing the temple, and pretty much, what's the word I'm looking for? They Let's see. Let me think about what's the word I'm looking for to make it a little more clear. They set the temple up how it's supposed to be, pretty much, to make it clear, right? So after talking about how long it would be, it tells us exactly how long it would be. Not one day more, not one day less. Right? Soon as he goes to Jerusalem and does what he does, from that exact year, from that exact time frame to the time frame that they cleanse the temple, is exactly 2,300 days. And remember, we're talking pinpoints. This is great pinpoints, right? So getting exact months, exact days, it gives us the exact months, Chislab, different things like that. It will tell us exact month, exact days, different things like that. That's going to give us exact pinpoints on these things. So this prophecy, when we're talking about this prophecy, we're talking about a prophecy that's so accurate. For someone not to believe the biblical narrative is not what it makes sense. Even there's some individuals that, if they may not believe it to be 170 or 164, they might change it by 1 year, but they still get the same results. I'll just show you that based upon what others say, because I do look into other opinions on these things. Some has set it at September 6th, 171 to December 24th, 165. And if you calculate those in between, you get, give or take, 2,300 days necessarily. I would more lean towards the Maccabees reports. The Maccabees reports are more accurate. Even though that's just 1 day, think about that. That is pinpoint still, right? That's very pinpoint. But like I said, the Maccabean revolts, this is what I got from looking at the exact reports from the Maccabean revolt, is that it came to exactly pinpoint time frame. So that was very interesting. But this point right here comes from a different writing, which I'll just show that real fast. A little idea of that writing necessarily. I don't know if I have it right here. Let me see. In a way, here's one. Here's an example. You can see right here. This is going to be from one of the writings. They're actually writing that the people who basically are the 7 Day Adventists were in error, is what they were writing here. So here's the Willing Willingtonburg. I'll probably say that weird. Guide to the Bible. So you can see right here, just to get a little understanding. And he basically writes right here, and all these notes will be in the description if someone wants to get a little more detail into these things. But I'm just going to give you the answer real fast. So it talks about the historical little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, and everything. Just talks about all the pinpoints, exact time frame, whatnot. But this is what they say was September 6, 171. I found it more 170, but to get a little understanding on these things. And he comes to where he ended, right? Antiochus died at 165, give or take. 170, is it 170, 165? I'll show you something when we look at that. But notice he talks about it was, however, on the basis of the period that William Miller, which is the founder of the modern 7 Day Adventist movement, went astray. He made the days stand for years and arrived at the date of October 22, 1844. Actually, he came to the time of 1843, but that's a different topic. So that's just something to understand, that there's no private interpretation of prophecy. You got to look at prophecy very closely. Sometimes it's tedious. Not that it's tedious, but you got to take your time. You got to go into it very much. You have to go into it very much. To make that make sense. You got to go into it. You have to go into the prophecy. So let's look at the time frames. Let's look at what we're looking at here. So far, what did we see here? And we haven't even touched on Daniel 10 and Daniel 11 yet. But notice here, we got these two horn, right? The two horn goat, which is Media and Persia, right? From 539 BC, going down to the time of the Greeks. When the Greeks get there at 330 BC, and then during the time of the Greeks, right, when they take the kingdom from Persia, then you're going to have Alexander die, and then you get the four horns that come up, right? The different kingdoms, right? The Cassandar, the Lysimachus, the Seleucus, and the Ptolemaic kingdom that comes up. And remember, the Seleucus kingdom is the one where you're going to get Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn. I found it to be 170 to 164, but some say it's 171 to 165. Either way, both of these come to 2,300 days. The one from 171 to 165, that one's more like a little extra day. So that's why I would say it more. I would say it more will be 170 to 164. If you look at Antiochus Epiphanes' death, note when he dies, and note when it says that he comes there to the land. So that's very important with those things. That's the exact. That's the exact in the middle of these in 168 BC. That's when Antiochus Epiphanes is lifted up at his maximum. Think about that too. That time frame, right? It's like 3.5 years. Isn't that very identical to the time of the beast? But remember, Revelation was written after this. So consider those things very, very deep when you look into those things. But it's like 3.5 years, right? You kind of get the same, in a way, the same type thing. But like I said, I'm not gonna go into this. This is a real paper. This is a real paper. This is a mess up though. William Miller thought that it was years. He thought 1844. He thought Messiah was gonna come, and that was a mistake. But that's a different topic. I'm gonna go over real fast just to get a little understanding on these things. I'm gonna go up. So when going over these things, we're talking information that is, like I said, pinpoint. The details have to be pinpoint. The way the kingdoms are, everything is. This is not made by a man. This was not told by a man. This is a prophecy told from the Most High Yah, so that others can take part in his, what's the word I'm looking for? In his knowledge, in the truth of what he brings forth, the truth of what he actually caused to happen, right? So that's very important to understand that there's multiple different individuals when they look into these things. They come to the same conclusion that this is a very prophetic event. This is a pinpoint accurate event. And this is an event that had came to pass as it was said. So just to get a little understanding on that, just scrolling here just to see if I had something else to show on here. All right. So and that's why I needed to do this on the computer because, like I said, this note is a major note. It's a major note to note. But we're gonna work our way to Daniel 11. So that was Daniel 8. Let's finish the last part of it. And if you have any questions, family, on any of these things, let me know. Who killed Nimrod, the mighty hunter? Um, that one, Nimrod would be more in ancient time. Nimrod would be more like all the way back in the time of ancient Babylon. So I want to know who killed Nimrod, to be honest with you. But even so, let's finish this little part right here.
And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true.
Oh.
Wherefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up, and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it.
So you see how deep it is? No one understood it because it was a time to come. So very, very deep stuff there. Very, very deep. So I'm gonna skip
Daniel 9.
We're gonna skip Daniel 9 and we're gonna go to Daniel 10.
In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing.
Let me pause it real fast. So now this is jumping later on. So remember, the Persians took the kingdom from Babylon. Babylon, remember different time frames of Babylon. This would be not during the time of Nimrod, which Nimrod would be more before the flood, but this one would be more about the time after Babylon. So after the prophecies of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and then now comes the end of the Babylonian Empire. Now comes the time of the Persians. So this is the first ruler of the Persians. So this will be about 536, give or take. Let's continue.
Revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true. But the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth, neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. And in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel, that I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz.
So now let me pause this. So I got to open up another note. Now, what is Daniel seeing here? What is he actually seeing here? What is he actually visualizing when he's seeing these things? He's seeing something that's actually basically identical to what's seen in Revelation, what John sees. John sees a very interesting vision. Daniel is actually seeing the Messiah. He actually meets the Messiah very early. And we're talking about Messiah before he enters the veil of flesh. So very important. Messiah himself is going to be appearing to Daniel, right? He's actually going to be talking to him. So Daniel actually spoke to the Messiah. He spoke to Yeshua, right? So he's going to have a very interesting experience. It almost happens everything. And the way we know, if we compare it side by side, everything is, what's the word I'm looking for? Exactly like, and we can look at certain verses, like there's certain verses where we can see certain things and whatnot. Right here, you can see this name right here. You just talk about these things where you see different things where it'll talk about the Alpha and Omega, right? The first and the last, or the Aleph and Tav, right? The leader, right? The lamb or the ox, right? The strong leader on the cross, right? On the cross sticks, right? On the sign, very important. Talking the pictographic Hebrew, right? Past the Paleo Hebrew, ancient, right? But notice what Daniel sees. So this is chapter 12, but down here, chapter 10, you can take if you take these scriptures side by side. I'll put this in the description as well afterwards. But if you take these scriptures side by side, it mirrors what happened in the book of John. As you can see, he'll say that he saw someone, right? And he'll talk about certain things. The characteristics, the individual's characteristics match up. So this just talks about his characteristics. I'm not gonna go over it, but if you want to see a little more on how Daniel spoke to Yeshua, this note I'll put in the description, and I'll just put Daniel spoke to Yeshua, and I'll put a note underneath it. But the same thing happened, right? Daniel fell, John fell. The way that he looked, the description of how he looked was about the same. You can see right here in Daniel, it says a certain man in linen, right? Also talks about that in Revelation. It says he was clothed in a garment, right? White, right? Down to his foot. Most likely white, just to get an understanding on that. Because we see that when we talk about linen, it's talk about a very pure garment. And it says he had gold upon his garment, right? That's very important. We also see that same thing. It says he's girded about and by the paps with a gold girdle. So you see what's going on there. He also had gold. So these two, both of them had gold. And also notice his face. It says, and his face appearing as lightning, right? Bright like lightning, right? Letting us know his face was very bright like lightning, right? And you see right here, his countenance, meaning his face, his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. So it's very bright. So lightning is bright. His face was very bright. So you can see what's going on there. Also, you can see this individual, his eyes, look at his eyes as a lamp of fire. See in Revelation, his eyes were as a lamp of fire. See what's going on there? Revelation. And then you see right here, his arms and his feet like the color of polished brass. So his arms and his feet like the color of polished brass. And you can see in Revelation his feet likened to fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. You see what's going on there? The matching up there, you're seeing that Daniel actually spoke to the Messiah before he entered the veil, right? Which is flesh, right? We go to other pieces where we can break it down. Daniel did exactly the same thing, right? He fell on his face as if he was asleep, fell to the ground when he seen him. But then the man touched him. And then what he say to him? He lift him up and he said, fear not, right? Right? Fear not. He came to give him understanding. Same thing in the book of Revelation, right? He fell as if he was dead, right? Just like Daniel fell down like he was in a deep sleep on his face. Revelation, you can see John fell down like he was dead. And then the man touched him and he said to him, fear not, right? He's the first and the last, right? Very important, that individual. So we get a lot of matching up with these things when we talk about these things, to match these things together. So very important to understand that it's a sure thing when we look at these things carefully to get an understanding on them. I'll put this in the description afterwards to get an understanding. But let's continue reading just to understand that visual. Consider what you're seeing there when it's talking about here. So I'm gonna just let it. It's gonna be. This is just a straight read through. So
his body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision. But a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves.
remember that happened with Paul, right? Remember, at first he was called Saul, right? Saul, very important, but he was called later on, right? Given the Greek Paul. Also, notice I didn't mention that it both of them, right? Voice like a multitude. Remember, I talked about that in Revelation, right? And the sword like with that came out of his mouth and everything, but it also talks about in other scriptures where his voice was like a multitude, like his voice like many waters, right? Talks about that. Talks about all those things. As it says, voice as the sound of many waters, right? Or a voice like a multitude. Voice of a multitude, voice like many waters. See what's going on there? So very identical. Very, very identical. You can see what's going on there. You know, Instagram. I don't have an Instagram, beloved family, but I do have a if you go to my page, I don't know why I don't sometimes show this, but If anyone wants to have a holy conversation, if you go to my channel, if you go to about, you can actually see, if you go down where it says links, if you click holy conversation, that will take you to our Discord. So we have a little Discord and whatnot, but we don't Discord on the Discord. We just have a holy conversation. So that's basically what I have, as time is at hand. But amen. Even so, amen. So with that, family, when we go over these things, I'm always looking forward to a holy conversation on these things, as it's always good to find fellowship. So let's continue on a little bit. So you can see right here, when we're talking about this, is a straight read through, but notice there's nothing new under the sun. It's not like when the New Testament came, it's not something different. It's a fulfillment. That's why when Christ came, he didn't say he didn't come to change the law. He came to fulfill it, right? He came to even fulfill prophecy, right? All the prophets spoke of him and his coming. There was something that was spoken of old. Is a lot of details on this thing. But notice when we're looking at these things, it's going to give us that this individual is going to give us the details of these things. But let's continue.
Therefore I was left alone, and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet heard I the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground. And behold, an hand touched me, which set me upon my knees, and upon the palms of my hands. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling.
Now notice Messiah always tells us that he is the Son of the Most High. Because remember, he is the Messiah. He is the high priest sitting at the right hand of God. That's very important. He himself also by God was anointed. This is a prophecy. Well, even so, this is scripture. Psalms talk about it. It says, Elohim, even thy Elohim has anointed thee above gladness, above thy fellows, right? God, even thy God has anointed thee above gladness, above thy fellows. I said it all weird. But you know what it says, right? Is it lets us know that he himself is an exalted individual. But he himself says, look what he says here. He doesn't say that he is God, but he says that he was sent when he comes here. So that's very important to understand. But later on, in the end of the book of Matthew, we know that all power was given to him. Therefore, he is God. We know that because even the individual Thomas, he ended up calling him my Lord and my God, my Theos, right? And he doesn't correct them. He doesn't say, no, don't say that. He just says, well, now you believe, because it's a secret. Because not many people notice when the Most High said in the beginning, right? Let us make man in our image. He was speaking not as in saying, I shall make man in my image, but he was saying, let us make man in our image. It's very deep and it's very complex, but that's another topic to get into. I'll put a video in the description if you want to understand that. That's something, since I'm talking about that topic, who is God, who is God, and those things. I had went over on this page right here, on this False Breeze page. I'll put this video in the description later. Who is Yah? Both. But the parable that really illustrates this is the parable of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of the king that makes a wedding feast for the prince, right? The prince of princes, right? Remember how it said he shall go against a prince of princes? Called him a prince of princes. So very important to understand that these two are one. We know that because, like I said in Psalms. Let me actually read it. Let me actually read it from the Psalms, since I quote it. I want to leave it at a slight misquote. But it's also talked about in Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews. It says, you have loved, in Hebrews 1 and 9, it'll say, you have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, God, Theos, even your God, has anointed you with oil of gladness above your fellows. Now, if you go to the book of Psalms, right? We know that in the book of Psalms, it's saying the same thing. In Psalms 45 and 7, it says, you have loved righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, Elohim, God, your Elohim, God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. See, it's very deep, very complex, but that's one of those things. Don't stumble on that stumbling block as some stumble upon that stumbling block. Some stumble on that stumbling block and are broken, but some will be crushed and grounded to powder. So very important. But this is the Messiah it's talking about here. Let's continue. It's very, very deep. Very, very deep stuff.
Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand, and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days.
Now, this is also important because they're like the Jehovah Witness. They'll try to say that Messiah is the angel Michael or Michael, but we know that's not true because we know that this is going to be an individual who is the Messiah before he is brought to the light, but brought in through the veil of flesh, manifest before all, so that all can see his salvation and hear it. This individual is being helped by the angel. So very important to understand that. He's also said that he's sent. So that's important to understand that he's not an angel, but he's being assisted by an angel. But he's also sent by God. Very deep. But let's continue.
And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground, and I became dumb. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake, and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this, my Lord, talk with this, my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Then there came again, and touched me one like the appearance of a man. And he strengthened me, and said, O man greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince.
So you see how he sets himself in a sense of authority? None that holds in these things save Michael the Prince. Obviously, also Most High already know these things.
Daniel 11. Also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia.
All right, so now let's get into the details of these things. Now, I'm not going to get super detailed, as I do like to make these things fairly longer when we go live. But I'm not going to go too deep into it because going to the exact details of these things could take a long time. But I do have on this note will be added is the Daniel 11 note. And if you see underneath these pictures right here and this little note right here, you'll see a playlist where it says check out this for more extra details on events of Daniel. And this little playlist, I made a playlist. I was just searching around for the best and the most accurate what's the word I'm looking for? In-depth studies of these events, Daniel 8 and Daniel 11. And these would be some of the best studies I found on those things. So you will see one from Calvary South Denver Church. You got one I made a little video just giving the whole explanation of all these things. This one I did with a robot voice. Probably got to revoice it. This one also Truth Unedited. If you know Truth Unedited, he goes over these things. We also have different individuals, so different individuals that go over these things. This individual just started recently going over it. Very pinpoint. I really recommend this one where it says the study of Christianity. Very important. This one also very, very deep. All these are going to be talking about the historicity and the deep details of the things. As you can see, they're longer. So going over all these details would take a fairly long time to go over, but that's why I put this here so that it can be shared and seen for these things, for the details of these things. So, and then this one is just more. This is going to be something else. This is more Daniel 9. This is just some videos I found just talking on Daniel chapter 9. This just goes into the 7 weeks prophecy. We'll talk about that another time and go into the 70 weeks prophecy and everything and go over those things, whatnot. Probably got to do some refining on that. So, very important. We're going to go up and we're going to understand something real fast. Notice in this prophecy in Daniel 11, I'm just going to do some highlights. I'm not going to do everything, but some highlights. What's important is it's very important to note that it first tells us that during the reign of Cyrus, there would come 3 more kings and then a 4th. So it lets us know after Cyrus, we can note those kings. We can note the list of kings of Persia. The 4th king, it lets us know that the 4th king actually is going to be the one that basically fights against Greece. That's very important. So the 4th king actually fights against Greece. 1 second. Let me grab something real fast. All right. Just had to take care of something real fast. Okay. So, like I said, the kingdom of Greece was attacked by the 4th king of Persia. That would actually be Xerxes. Long story short, I'll just read a couple highlights here from some notes just to get a little understanding on some things. It just talks about a battle. It was a major battle that had happened that pretty much a small force of the Greek warriors, right, led by one of the rulers at the time of Sparta, resisted the much larger Persian forces, but were ultimately defeated. So the scripture, when it talks about the 4th king and talks about how he went against Greece, is accurate. It's 100% accurate, and it was written before it came to pass. Now, there were other kings of Persia, but the prophecy is more focused on when this king comes. Why? Is because this king is also a king that is noted to be there during the time of Esther. In fact, is also thought that this is that king that was the one that basically when Esther was there that had that whole event. So in the book of Esther is actually writing about this king of Persia. So very interesting. Um, that's why this prophecy is actually giving us a little details of this king and his events. So very, very interesting just to give the details of those things. But note right here, you can see Xerxes basically ordered the destruction of Athens. So Athens, let me just show a little pinpoint on that. What is Athens and everything? Just to get a little understanding. Maybe I should go over here. Back over here. Athens is pretty much long story short, it's pretty much a place in Greece. It's in the center of the area of Greece. Little understanding there. It just basically talks about he basically attacked that area. Let me actually just show you a pinpoint of what it's saying that Xerxes attacked. No, he attacked a center point of Greece. So I'll put this here just to show you what it's talking about here. But right here, so you can see he actually attacked this place. So Xerxes, coming from here, from over here, after taking, all these areas, they already had these areas, and they came and they basically fought the Greeks and they won. But there was never a Persian emperor or leader of the Persians that came back over there after that. He was the one that came over there and attacked them. So it's interesting how the scripture pinpoints that it was the fourth one that defeated them, right? And that makes it really interesting because it's giving us a little extra information, right? It's just giving it's kind of like a little like a just showing itself that it is inspired, just showing itself that it's inspired. And then so you can see right here, so he goes against the city and burned the city, right? And that left a lot of obviously um archaeological evidence. So that evidence is also called, as you can see right here. I don't know how you say it, but this is what it left. It left some evidence of the pretty much the debris and the rubble and everything, the destruction layers and whatnot. That's evidence of this thing happening during this time. So it basically is a witness of these things. So the Persians thus gained control of all mainland Greece to the north, all the way of Corinth. So very, very interesting that during that time he got control of Greece. Just like it says right there where it says, you can see that the third king and then the fourth one will come, which will be richer, more powerful and whatnot. And by his strength, his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So you can see right there, that's what happened. During the time of this fourth king, he went against Greece and he ended up basically besieging it. So very, very interesting to get some pinpoints on there. And then it tells us later after that, it'll let us know that a later king will rise up. It says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds. Who is it talking about? Talking about the next king that comes after, right? Where it says, and a mighty king shall stand up, right? Because so he's took some areas of Greece, is letting you know that Persia provoked Grecia. The reason why it's telling you that is to let you know that Persia provoked Grecia, and then later Grecia retaliated. It's also noted that uh, Alexander the Great had his goal was set to basically take all those kingdoms. When Alexander came out, he took all those kingdoms in the 30 years of his life. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion, right? And do according to his will. Right? Let's talk about basically Alexander the Great. And it just goes on and talks about at the time of Alexander the Great, when he shall stand up. Remember, we talked about that. His kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven. So remember how we talked about how those four wings represent the four directions, the four winds, and also we know that the four horns came up on the goat. So that's what it's talking about there. And not to his prosperity, right? Like we talked about, not to his prosperity. They have their own power, nor according to his dominion, because they have their own parts of the kingdom, which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. So very divided kingdom, right? So you can see right here, we'll talk about the kings of the south and the king of the north. You can see other pinpoint ideas. For example, in that little playlist I was showing, this individual put this little book here. It's a pinpoint read. You can find other books that talk about it. I'll talk about another book that talks about this event as well. It says, then the king of the south shall grow strong, but one of his officers, now note this, it gives us a detail about the king of the south. It says that one of his officers shall grow stronger than he and shall rule a realm greater than his own. So it's letting you know that a officer of the king of the south, it would rise up to power and rule a different area. Well, what's interesting is that the individual Seleucus, he actually fled into Egypt and became one of the king of the south, Ptolemy's generals. So remember, he said one of his officers would grow stronger than he. So remember, Seleucus went down there and he basically ruled. He became one of his generals, and it says he basically, long story short, right? You can see right here, shall rule a realm greater than his own. And it basically just lets you know that, as you can see just from the map itself, he ended up having a larger area of control. And also, we know that the Seleucus kingdom defeated or took the areas later of the Lysimachus and Cassandar kingdom, which were all part of the same Grecian empire. So they all became one part. So very important. So you can see Seleucus ruled a greater realm than Ptolemy. So very, 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 very important. So very, very deep, very pinpoint, accurate things that happen there. You can see other things that talk about that. This is from the makers of the makers and teachers of Judaism, from the fall of Jerusalem to the death of Herod the Great. It just talks about some history and whatnot, and it just has some very interesting quotes. I just want to read, I guess, a little bit something here, little idea. It just, I'm not gonna read the whole thing. It just talks about what happened, right? Alexandria and everything. Alexandria, right? Remember, Alexandria is actually gonna be the area of Egypt, whatnot. That's gonna be where you have the king of the south in that area. But going down, you can see right here, it just talks about some things that happened in that area. I'm gonna read this. In the decisive battle, I'm gonna say it right, Epis in 301 BC, which you can see when we're talking about these things, this is about the same time. You can see 316, 312, then it goes up to 301. You can see 301, talk about the same thing. Epis, at that time of the battle, talk about he ruled a different area. See where it's talking about that and everything. There's a second witness. Get a little understanding. Go back up here. Make sure I go to down back to that spot. I think I slid on it right here. In the decisive battle of Epis in 301 BC, the overshadowing power, where you can see what's going on there. I think it's Antiochus, probably said that weird, was broken, and the control of Western Asia was divided between Seleucus and Ptolemy. These are the kings of the south and the king of the north. This is why it says the king of the south and the king of the north. So be major rulers. In fact, Egypt was the stronger one until Seleucus gained that power. So you can see what's going on there. And then remember I talked about the Seleucus Empire. Remember his descendants, when you see who were known as Seleucids and Seleucid, I don't know what we say there, but these his dynasty, right? That's why we was talking about that. Those horns still having the name of the first individuals and everything. But it'll let you know that they soon attempted to basically fight, wrestle with Egypt. And during the following centuries, right? It's very important. Just talks about some things that they got strong. Long story short, and long story short, they right here in 295 and again in 219, they were for a brief period masters of Palestine. So Palestine, that's the area of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was in the midst of a divide. The reason why that's important because this is where Antiochus Epiphanes comes from. He comes from the Seleucus Empire, but Seleucus Empire in between the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucus kingdom. And during the most of this period, it was held by the kingdom of the south, right? Ptolemy's kingdom. So very important. You see the battle, the in between things that's happening there. So very important to note that we actually see things happening in between here. So You can note here, this will be the Seleucus kingdom at up here. This will be the king of the north, and this will be the king of the south right here in Egypt. So just to get a little understanding on what it's talking about there, pinpoint accurate stuff in history. So remember, there's also, not going to go into it now, but there's more history in between these kingdoms. As you know, this is not the only kingdoms there. There's also many kingdoms and many empires and stuff like that, but a lot of them don't hold any type of power like the Seleucus and the Ptolemaic kingdom. These kingdoms are the main kingdoms during the said Grecian Empire. These are going to be the powerhouses, the king of the north and the king of the south. Remember, we have already talked about how this kingdom ended up taking these areas. So that's going to be your kingdom of the north. So more larger, more powerful. And then there's this is also still a strong kingdom though, the kingdom of the south. So we get in different leaders during those times, right? Different leaders. So you can see different individuals. You can see in Seleucus, and then you can see different individuals, who's with who, and a lot of fights. They're called the Syrian Wars. If you never heard of the Syrian Wars, they're just wars that these individuals were going at it. Right. All these things are here for the sake of evidence of what's happened. It's just basically the Syrian Wars were a series of 6 wars between the Seleucus Empire and obviously the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. So get a little understanding of those things. They were basically battling, going at it for a long time. So they was going at it. So you can see those things, you get a little understanding. Now, that's how detailed this part of the scripture is. It gets very detailed. Now, there's more details I'm not going to go into now, but I want to show you that this part of the book is very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? If anyone ever needed to know if the Bible was real, this is the best way to understand that it's real. Prophecy. Prophecy really illustrates how the biblical narrative is the inspired word of God. It's very important to understand that. History. That's why we study on history. Then we get later verses where it will talk about, remember, later on, the individual Antiochus, he's going to attack, right? Later on, he's going to attack Jerusalem. But what happens during his time? That's when Rome starts to rise up. It'll call it Kittim. We already went into that. I did a study on Kittim and some genetics and stuff on who they are and whatnot and things of that sort. But we'll get there when we get there, just to understand that pretty much it's a diverse, like I said, very mixed mingled group. But in connection to this area right here, and connection of these areas, that's Cyprus or Kittim, in connection with those things. But looking at these things carefully, let's continue on a little bit, just get a little understanding. Remember, we talked about Antiochus, so just jumping through the chapter real fast. He, remember, in the land of Israel, Ammon, right? The Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites was in the land of Israel. Well, land of the Levant, or in the sense what is called Palestine, right? But they moved. This is the time frame that they move. We don't know where they are necessarily. Edom end up settling in Armenia. Armenia ends up becoming a place where a lot of the Amalekites end up growing. Also, it's important to know that Edom ended up ruling later on when the Romans are there during the time of Herod over Judea, which is also important to note. But the Moabites, Ammonites, a lot of the Edomites, these are all one family. Remember, the Edomites are literally twins. They're blood twins of Israel. And the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're from Abraham's nephew. So these are relatives. These are all related. All these are related. It's very important. And then what do we also have to know? That when they move, they settle in a different area, because he ends up going against them. And you can see, but these shall escape from his hand, right? Even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also on the countries, and the land of Egypt, right, shall not escape. So you see, that's the time that he actually takes Egypt. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians and things like that, right? So he ended up taking those areas and everything. So very important. Exactly, it's exactly what happens because we know that the kingdom of the south actually was over these areas. So remember how it word for word tells you that he would take Egypt and the Libyans and the Ethiopians. So we actually know because remember the Ethiopians. When you think the Ethiopians, you're thinking the Nubians or Nubia, right? And then Libya, right? You can see right here. There's a little understanding when you think of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Following the Syrian wars with the Seleucid Empire, a rival Hellenistic state, the Ptolemaic kingdom, right, extended its territory to include eastern Libya and Sinai, right? That's where the Red Sea crossing and everything, right? Sinai, the mountain of Sinai, and northern Libya. So when it says that he took the kingdom of the south, or in the sense, the land of Egypt, he took all those things. It was word for word, and it matches with history, right? All these things match. All these things match exactly as described. So very, very interesting. Very interesting to see these things. But then what we know, the as it says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north. So the north and the east. So where's the north and where's the east? So if this is over here and then he took these areas, the north will be above him. So above him, so up here and eastward. So northeast. So what do we have? Rome. So he's basically saying tidings from Rome, right? He's basically saying upon hearing something from Rome, he got worried. So you can see what's going on there. He got worried from the tidings from Rome. So very deep. So it says, but tidings from the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and to utterly to make away many. Right? To take utterly to make away many. Yeah, to take away many, make away many, right? You can see right there that's basically talking of basically how the Roman Empire rose up. I just want to show, basically the growth, little understanding on what it's talking about here, the time frame and everything on it. Just go to a little timestamp here. So you can see, if you see here, you can see right here, there's going to be a kingdom that's going to rise up. And what happens here is that you can see this right here would belong to Greece, right? This kingdom right here belonged to Greece, but Rome is now what is he getting tidings from? He's finding out that Rome's moving in. Rome's now making his move and moving in. So he heard that and he got worried. So he heard what had happened. So just to get a little understanding, that's gonna tell us about the Seleucid Wars, right? Right? You see what's going on there? You can see Seleucid Empire right there, and now they're going at it. So it's saying basically the Romans were attacking, and that was something that was very important. So Rome would grow and later become, um, basically become. I probably typed that weird. Rome would grow and later become. I'll say it's right. It's eastern half, which is called the Byzantine Empire. So that's later on. Rome would later grow and become its Byzantine part. So that's very important. But the east area of Rome, you see these areas right here. This is where you have your Seleucid Wars. Remember we was talking about that? We just showed a little bit on that video. That's what that video was showing from that time frame, right? Starting at 350. You can see right here, these will be the starts of the Seleucid Wars. You can see right there in the in between, you can see the wars that were happening. So what happened? What happened? What was going on? So he was hearing about some things that were happening there. Also, you can see it would expand. The Romans end up actually like getting deeper in because Rome actually ends up controlling all these areas later on. So what he ended up hearing was that Rome was moving in. So that's what he was hearing. He was hearing that Rome was about to come in and do what they was going to do. So you can see they end up growing and taking these areas and moving over here and whatnot. So that's very important. So that's what he was hearing. He was hearing basically Rome was going to move in. It's very important. So also what's important is, so, and remember this in Daniel 11 is giving us details of the Grecian Empire till its end. So it's giving us a understanding of its time frame to the end of it, to Antiochus Epiphanes time. So very important. Byzantine Empire, that's still the Roman Empire. Just a little understanding. Not gonna go over it, but just a little history. You know, when you think of these things, the next kingdom that comes was Rome, right? What happened to Rome? The one part was taken, right, by the northern barbarians, right? After part was taken by the northern barbarians, the west half became known as the Holy Roman Empire, right? After the barbarians took part of it, there was a part of Rome that became what is called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, what's important to know about the Holy Roman Empire, it wasn't technically Rome at that time, but it was considered, I don't know how you would explain it, but it's not technically an empire, nor is it Roman, and nor was it holy. So it's just something to know that this empire right here would be a empire that was set up by what is called what they call the barbarians, which we know more about who these individuals are today, because history and genetics and different things like that. These were more like the Germanic tribes and things like that, a mixed, a mingled group. But this is what they took. They took this part of Rome. So the part of Rome they would have took was this area over here, but Rome also had a eastern area that was a little more stronger, a little stronger area. So you can see this will be the whole thing of Rome, but you will have this part of Rome that was taken, and then this part of Rome that would still be there. And then notice this part of Rome later fell by the Ottoman Empire. This is just extra little things because it leads us up to where we are today, iron and clay, right? It says when the east of Rome fell to the Ottomans, it's known the last remnant of Rome joined the barbarians. If you don't know, we already went over that when we was going over these things. We was talking about what had happened, right? We was talking about the whole this one we went over the whole origin, the history of the Romans and everything, and genetics and all those things and whatnot. And we noted that when Rome fell, right, this is when it became also complete, that part of that said Holy Roman Empire became partly Roman. I'll just show you a piece of what I'm talking about here.
It took the guns of the modern world to finally bring them down. In 1453, the Turks brought their superweapon, a monster cannon that could fire a 1,500-pound stone ball over a mile. Together with more than 100 smaller guns, they kept up a steady bombardment day and night. A section of the old walls collapsed, but even in their death throes, they proved formidable. The rubble absorbed the shock of the cannonballs better than the solid wall. It took a month and a half of continuous blasting to finally open a breach. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, drew his sword and jumped into the gap to stop the onrushing horde, disappearing into legend. The city was taken, and the Roman Empire finally disappeared, but those broken walls had one last gift. As the survivors fled the doomed city, they brought with them their precious books and their ancient traditions. They traveled west to Italy, reintroduced the Greek language and learning to Western Europe, and ignited the Renaissance. Thanks to Constantinople's walls, that pile of brick and marble that guarded them for so long, we still have our classical past.
All right, so obviously, right, when we think of those things, amen, Javane is known to be the Greeks, amen, brother. So that's absolutely correct. That's right. So you can see right here, when we think of those ancient areas, we're going to have a good understanding a little bit. When I say a little bit, because it's so mixed and mingled, but we got a good understanding that technically they would be a European group, but they did, after it fell, some of them survived. So this was the area that I was just showing you, right, in symbol, a little area, a little appendage right there. And then zooming out, because remember Constantine moved the capital of Rome over there. Zooming out. So they had went and settled over here and became part with these Germanic tribes. So think about that. The stage of iron became iron and clay. It's very deep. So that's one of the ones. This is, like I say, we went over genetics. I'm not gonna go over genetics for a while. I don't think I'm gonna go over for a while. I think we got enough in, but this is a very deep study, very very deep study. It was something that I didn't really, when I went over it, I didn't really say much to it. I just wanted to show all the information on it. It was a very little deep one. So that's something that's very interesting. Now, it's also important that that's where we are today. So the world today is essentially divided by Turks and barbarians and other diverse peoples and scattered peoples, pretty much. So we're in a time of iron and clay, without a doubt. But we're in a time of iron and clay. So get a little more history on these things and whatnot. So when you think of the book of Daniel, it's a very prophetic book. But let's just hear for the sake of finishing it, let's hear the rest of Daniel. So, like I said, I'm not going to go over everything on Daniel 11. It's very deep, but let's hear it together. Well, technically, you can play, you can hear it, you can read it. I pretty much gave a summary. Like I said, I'm not gonna go too deep into it. If someone wants me to, we can go deep into this and go into this chapter. But this chapter alone would require its own video to just sit and to go over it because it's so detailed. It's talking about alliances and all of it's pinpoint accurate. But like I said, as a playlist that will be added and that will go into those things, which is also on this note, which will be right here, right above this map, and it'll be this playlist right here at the top. And that will have pretty much major details on pretty much the events that happened there. So that was pretty much Daniel 8, Daniel 10, and Daniel 11 for the sake of understanding. So I guess just end it. Maybe we should just let it play just to get Daniel 11. 1 second. All right. Well, just for the sake of understanding or sake of the live, let's finish Daniel 11. Let's let play.
And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement.
Cleopatra.
But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begot her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come, and overflow, and pass through. Then shall he return, and be stirred up, even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. But the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall.
So you can see what's going on there. Was it saying to establish the vision, the transgressors, right? Just saying the robbers of thy people, because they're transgressing, they're stealing, they're trying to take salvation. Now remember, it's a community. They also will be doing the thing together. Just like remember what happened with Jerusalem, because the king wasn't doing righteous, the people weren't doing righteous. So even Daniel went into captivity, right? Did Daniel do something wrong? We didn't see recording of Daniel doing something wrong, but we do see that others were doing something wrong. That's why it says the robbers of thy people, right, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, right? Like the prophecy says.
So the king of the north shall come, and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed.
So remember the glorious land, that's talking Jerusalem. So it's talking about this king coming into the land of Jerusalem, causing damage.
He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land. But he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably, and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him he shall work deceitfully. For he shall come up, and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil, and riches, yea. And he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power, and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain.
So it's talking about pretty much. Long story short, that was a pretty much a betrayal in the kingdom of the south, right? It's really the whole thing is absolutely pinpoint accurate when you look at these things. That there was a betrayal that was like just like it happened to Julius Caesar, that his own individuals betrayed him. So then the king of the north and the ruling in these areas.
And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. And he shall do exploits, and return to his own land.
So there you go. You see what he's saying? He's against the holy covenant, right? But this is Antiochus Epiphanes attacking, right? Very important.
At the time appointed he shall return, and come toward the south. But it shall not be as the former, or as the latter. For the ships of Shittim shall come against him, Therefore he shall be grieved.
So you see what's going on. So it's saying that he's trying to go against the South because he's going to try to take it. He probably would have took it, but then Rome rose up, right? Rome came and is starting to really threaten them. So he's saying the ships of Rome basically was going against him, and he was grieved because he can't fight with them.
And return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate.
Remember what that is?
And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong, and do exploits.
Maccabees.
And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him.
See what it's saying there? Talk about the end of Antiochus Epiphanes. That's the whole Grecian Empire into the end of it. So very, very deep, very, very detailed part of scripture that we can actually note these things, that the king of the south, king of the north going at each other to the end of it, getting the full understanding that this part of scripture, there's a lot of things that I've seen before, but when studying prophecy, this is one of those parts of scripture that when you note it from its beginning to its end, in the in-betweens and the details of the kings and the females, it talks about the females, it talks about the alliances, it talks about who goes against who wins. It's so detailed and it's exact. Everything that happens goes exactly as it's said. This is one of the most this is one of the scriptures that if you was to see it and to look at it pinpoint, you can't but help but say that the most high is the only God, the true God, and that he is the only God that reveals truth and mysteries of what's to come. So that's real prophecy. So next time we'll get into Daniel 9 and get into some of that, and then Daniel 12 and get into some of that. So with that, family, I'll put these notes in the description. Very deep study today. That's Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 and Daniel 11 in completion. So with that, family, I hope that you are blessed. I hope that you are beloved. And amen, family.